In October 2022, 21-year-old Grace Jennings was found brutally murdered inside a detached garage in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Near her body was a long sword covered in blood. Kiara McCulley admitted her role in the killing, but prosecutors say she did not act alone. The state alleges Isaac Apodaca manipulated and coerced McCulley into killing Grace, pointing to disturbing text messages they say reveal a conspiracy and a murder plot. Apodaca has pleaded not guilty. His defense disputes the state's version of events and argues that Kiara McCulley was the one responsible for planning and carrying out the killing. Now, a jury has to decide whether Isaac Apodaca is the mastermind behind Grace Jennings' murder, or is the state holding him responsible for a killing he did not commit. This is State of New Mexico versus Isaac Apodaca.
Counsel, go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back. Hope you had a restful holiday week. Over the course of the next week, probably into Wednesday, as the judge has stated earlier, you're going to hear some testimony. You're going to see some evidence. What you are not going to see is any evidence that 29-year-old Isaac Samson Apodaca, seated over there, is guilty of the crimes charged by the state of New Mexico. Now, you heard Ms. Murphy go into a long opening statement, and it's just that. Opening statement is just a statement as to what the parties could show, what the evidence could show. And Ms. Murphy laundry listed all of her witnesses and what they could potentially say. But what you will learn, and what Ms. Murphy acknowledged, is that Ms. Kiara McCulley butchered Grace Jennings more than a dozen times. And then now they want to blame Isaac Apodaca, who had nothing to do with the stabbing of Grace Jennings with a 3-foot sword, 36 inches, as Ms. Murphy pointed out, a 36-inch sword more than a dozen times. And the state, and you're going to hear a lot of stuff about coercion and control and different things, that the state is going to wants you to believe that Isaac Apodaca coerced and controlled Kiara McCulley to stab Grace Jennings more than a dozen times, even post-mortem, after death. The level of provocation and rage that you will see that Kiara McCulley exhibited on that day is extraordinary. And yet they're going to try to argue that Isaac Apodaca somehow coerced and controlled her. And Kiara herself, as Ms. Murphy pointed out, is going to testify. And she got a deal. She got an agreement, leniency, in exchange for testifying against Isaac Apodaca, who had nothing to do with the stabbing. These are, serious allegations that the state is going to try and make you believe that the defendant, who himself was clearly gullible and manipulated, somehow coerced and controlled Kiara McCulley, who again bludgeoned Grace Jennings to death. You may ask, why are we here? We are here because of some messages. There were messages that the state is going to introduce. But that in and of itself and does not point towards Isaac's responsibility in this case as an accomplice or aiding, abetting, or any theory. Those statements could have been, maybe not the best statements. Clearly, he was being manipulated by somebody who you will see through the evidence had rage and was planning this situation. Nobody expected Kiara McCulley to do what she did on that particular day. Before I discuss the facts in more details, I want you to remind you of the standard. I'm not going to stand up here like a used car salesman and try to sell you on beyond a reasonable doubt, because this is a pretty straightforward case. And you will hear testimony about accomplice liability, aiding and abetting, and the burden is always on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But it is not required that the state prove beyond all reasonable doubt. And we're not going to argue here that aliens somehow landed on Earth and encouraged or intended for Kiara McCulley to commit this crime. All we're asking is that X could have happened instead of Y. The state is trying to argue that Isaac Apodaca was somehow an accomplice, an aiding and abetting. We're saying, no, he wasn't involved in this. You're going to hear a lot of contradictions from Kiara McCulley when she testifies. She even discussed how there was a sword that Isaac handled and somehow cut her. Yet you will see no DNA of Isaac's DNA on any of the swords, that he handled anything. He wasn't even in the room, as you will learn from testimony. Isaac was cooperative. Isaac went to a T-Mobile store. His mother had called 911. He was there at a T-Mobile store, cooperated with authorities. Kiara McCulley, on the other hand, you're going to hear, ran. She split because she knew she had committed a heinous crime. Isaac, on the other hand, was scared, cooperative, but understood that something serious had happened beyond his control in that house. and he was cooperative with police. Not the behavior of a killer. It's not the behavior of a killer to go to a T-Mobile store, cooperate with police after his mom had notified authorities, told his mom, and then it's not the behavior of a killer to do that. It is the behavior of a killer. Kiara McCulley, who we're agreeing, state agrees, bludgeoned this individual, Grace Jennings, more than a dozen times to death again. It is reasonable to believe that Kiara McCulley would run because she was the one who was guilty of murder. And she, in fact, did when authorities arrived. The state's going to try to argue that this was somehow premeditated, deliberate murder under a theory of accomplice liability. But the evidence will show you something else. The evidence should show that, again, Isaac Apodaca was not present when Grace Jennings was killed. Evidence will show that Isaac went to the main house, used a restroom. When he returned to the garage, he found Grace Jennings already deceased with severe injuries. Kiara McCulley was standing there and told Isaac, "I did it." Isaac's first reaction was not to flee, not to hide, not to destroy evidence. His first reaction was to call his mother and tell her to call 911. Then again, he went to a nearby cell phone store and was cooperative with police. Does that sound like somebody who is guilty of willful, deliberate, and premeditated first-degree murder? Go to a cell phone store, have his mom call 911, and then cooperate with authorities? Again, that's not the behavior of a killer. Again, and the state will try to argue that there were text messages. And Kiara, as you will hear, will say all kinds of different stories. And we'll have witnesses here who will say that Kiara had been planning this, and Isaac had no knowledge, no idea what was going on. And again, this is I don't want to say it's a simple case, it's a very serious case, but you really have to kind of hone in on whether Isaac had any willful, deliberate, or premeditated intent to commit first-degree murder here. And that did not happen. Murder. When asked if she killed Grace Jennings, Kiara had stated, "I'm not sure." Then she had told Isaac, "I did it." And then you'll hear numerous contradictions throughout the testimony. And also you'll hear DNA testimony. You'll find out that there's no DNA of Isaac's, although Kiara argues that Isaac was handling the sword and somehow cut her. So pay attention to the evidence very carefully. Actually, some of our theories overlap, our arguments, I should say, overlap with the state. State's acknowledging that Kiara McCulley was involved in this. State's acknowledging that Kiara McCulley got an agreement in exchange for testifying against Isaac Apodaca, wouldn't you? If you're going to be spending much of the rest of your life in jail?
Objection, Your Honor.
Vote, counsel. Counsel, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. And again, our job here is to show what the evidence will show. It's opening statement, what we believe the evidence will show. And then in closing, we'll wrap up and discuss what the evidence, in fact, did show. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that Isaac was not present when Grace Jennings was killed. The evidence will show that Kiara McCulley confessed to him, "I did it." The evidence will show that Isaac immediately called for help. The evidence will show that Kiara McCulley had violent fantasies, claimed mental illness, admitted holding a weapon, and trying to stab Grace Jennings, and could not even confirm to police whether she had killed Grace. At the end of the trial, after you've heard all the evidence and considered it carefully, we will ask that you return a verdict of not guilty. The state will not have proven their burden. They will not have proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt that Isaac Apodaca had committed first-degree murder. Thank you for your time.
The statements and testimony you've just heard are now part of the evidence the jury has to consider in the case against Isaac Apodaca. As more witnesses take the stand and more evidence is revealed, the jury will have to decide what really happened in the hours leading up to Grace Jennings' brutal murder.